The country's unemployment rate has dropped to 34.5% in the first quarter of 2022, following the high of 35.3% in the final quarter of 2021. The biggest contributor to jobs was in community and social services. The number of unemployed youth remains high, with 4.7 million people aged between 15 and 34 without work in the first quarter of this year. This week, the President announced his broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Council, which would deal with these issues, among others. We speak now to CEO of the Black Business Council, Kganki Matabane. Kganki, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us. I mean, we all noted the decline there of the unemployment rate down to 34.5%. What was the Council's takeaway of those stats released this week?
Good morning, and thank you very much for having us. The decrease is a drop in the ocean. If you look at the contributors, for example, the community services, those are not necessarily jobs. Those are like those EPW type of job opportunities. If someone digs a hole today, they classify that as a job, and if they come tomorrow, then it's a second job. That for us is not a solution to the problem. We have a very serious problem. We need to put all our efforts as a country and use the very same approach that we used during COVID to focus all our energies on jobs. And jobs are basically the outcomes of actions that needs to be taken. For us to create jobs, we need to be able to support entrepreneurs. We need to support enterprises, because it's enterprises that will create jobs, specifically small enterprises. Because if you give small enterprises more work through procurement, they've got no choice but to create jobs. But if you give the same opportunities to big business, the big business always have extra capacity. So it's upon us as a country to say, instead of saying we're celebrating Youth Month, let's come up with proper, sustainable solutions for youth unemployment. You can't have a country where 75% of young people are unemployed. To put it in perspective, for example, we've got 40 million people who are working, of a working age. Obviously, then you have to minus students and others. And out of that, we've got a 45% real unemployment, because the 34% unemployment is removing those who are discouraged from looking for jobs. But in actual fact, they are still unemployed. So we've got almost half of the people who are supposed to be working not working. They're sitting at home on a daily basis, roaming the streets. No wonder the crime rate is so high, because people are sitting at home with nothing to do. So as a country, we need to focus on solutions. What needs to be done? We need to support small businesses, because that's the place where we are likely to create a serious number of jobs.
Yeah. Now, talking about the solutions, Kganki, the Black Business Council, as we know, very recently held its two-day summit under the theme of job creation, essentially trying to tackle the problem that we're discussing right now. When it comes to youth unemployment, some sectors believe, as you've mentioned, that it's something that can be cured by investing enough in small to medium-sized business enterprises and sort of ensuring that those are more viable and more sustainable means of creating jobs. Others have highlighted the issue around education and the quality of education and how that's impacting the youth and their ability to actually obtain gainful employment. What is the real issue here when we're talking about youth unemployment? Or is it, in fact, this multi-pronged issue where we do have an education crisis coupled by the fact that we just don't have enough enterprises available to take on some of our graduates?
Yeah, I think this multi-pronged, if you look at the bigger problem is that our economy is just not growing. So when we are sitting in an environment where the economy is growing, there's no way the economy is going to be able to absorb people, educated or not educated. Because if we do have a challenge of our education system, but we do have out of the more than 10 million unemployed young people, around 2 million of them have got some tertiary education. So we do have some people who've got degrees who are unemployed. So it cannot necessarily be education be the only problem. Where the bigger problem is that we are not growing the economy. So when the cake does not grow, and then the number of people who are supposed to share the cake grows, we're going to have the same problem. So hence we are saying, let's focus on growing small business. That will help us to grow the economy. And then we need to find ways of then saying, how do we fund small business? Because most of the people, and most of the time, the challenge that small businesses are having is access to funding. And then hence we've been proposing that, why can't we take all the enterprise development funds that are supposed to be spent by companies, put them in a fund like the Solidarity Fund, and let it be run by private sector people, maybe with 1 or 2 people from government to avoid corruption. And then let's then take that money and fund small businesses. Because if you look at how corporates are sort of spending the enterprise development fund, most of the time they are doing an accounting entry, they are not necessarily spending that money. So if we put that in an independent fund run by independent people, we think that will bring some life to the economy, will make sure that the small business grows substantially, and that will be able to absorb young people, because small businesses, for example, the requirements, entry requirements are not that stringent. It becomes a little bit easier for small businesses to appoint or employ young people. And then that way they will be dealing with the unemployment problem.
Can that same recipe be applied, Kganki, in the case of black women in this country? I mean, when we talk about slices of the cake, black women still enjoy probably the thinnest and smallest slice of all. And, you know, when we're talking about fostering greater participation for women, black women in this country, can the same recipe that you've just outlined for us apply in that case? Or do we still need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a far more unique and tailored approach to fostering greater participation for women in the economy?
Yes, the same recipe can be used for women, for people living with disabilities. If you look at the people living with disabilities in the country, they are almost treated as charity cases. And they've got capability, so they must be absorbed into the job market. The other thing, the president of the country always speaks about putting aside 40% of the procurement, state procurement for women. And then we've been saying to the president that will never happen until we put it in law, in an act. And then hence we've been pushing for the public procurement bill to be speeded up so that it becomes a public procurement act. And then in the act itself, we need to have set aside. So the state must set aside that 40% legally, so that we don't get taken to court left, right, and center. And then that 40% then will be able to help women to participate meaningfully in the mainstream economy. And also we can do the same with young people, we can do the same with people living with disabilities, because those are the most disadvantaged, and unemployment affects them more than all the other groups.